Right, well, it's a challenge to follow Christina, actually, this afternoon, but I'll try my best. I'm going to change direction slightly, and I'm going to talk about some work I've been doing with colleagues here at the LSE and also in Finland, which is really trying to build up more about what we know about the effectiveness of largely small, non-health service delivered interventions to try and protect and promote the mental well-being of older people. And this is work that we've been doing actually for NICE. So I'm presenting some things today that are part of a larger piece of work for NICE, which is trying to inform some of the guidance they're developing at the moment on promotion of mental well-being and independence in older people. And because of that, we have a very specific set of inclusion and exclusion criteria. So we are only interested in this particular review in healthy older people. And by older, we define that as people who are over 65 or retired and over the age of 55. So we didn't look at anything to do with dementia, or people who have substantive health and social care needs. We weren't interested in one-to-one interactions with healthcare professionals, and we were very much focused on positive mental well-being outcomes, not negative measures. And things like social participation. We looked at English language material published since 2013, 2003 actually, that should be, 10 years, wide range of databases. The usual thing you see when people do reviews, they talk about the huge amount of literature they go through. So we went through about 18,000 papers, abstracts, read 424 of those, and included 86 studies in our actual review. Now, what can we say? Well, actually, we're talking about here a lot of different types of interventions or actions that can help promote mental well-being and independence. At the heart of all of them really is this issue of communication, support, friendship. Simply people coming together who choose to come together. It is an absolutely fundamental part of protecting people's mental well-being. But there are other specific programs. There may be issues around programs around mentoring or signposting people to help and support. I'm sure there are plenty of people in the audience who know about navigator programs in various parts of the country. There's a whole range of largely small-scale activities around arts and culture, things like singing, which I'll mention in a bit. There's a very important area around intergenerational activities. There's great work in the United States by Morrow, Howell and others over the years about something called the Experience Corps in the States, which is it's about getting retired older people to help young children to read, helping with their reading and their literacy skills, which has positive benefits both for the children and for the older people themselves. So there's a lot around intergenerational activities and a lot we can learn from other countries, not just the US. Volunteering actually links more generally to that. The protective power of volunteering. There's a large literature supporting that concept. Lifelong learning. One of the things we found in this review, all over the country you will find these groups called the University of the Third Age. They're pretty much everywhere. And they're not about formal academic learning, but they're about encouraging people to keep on participating in educational-based activities or learning for the joy of learning. There's another area as well, which we haven't mentioned today at all, around digital inclusion and avoidance of digital exclusion. And one way of doing that is by helping people to actually learn to use computers, to learn to use the internet, to learn to use new technologies, the tablets and all the rest of it. Can that have a benefit? So we found some papers, I'm not going to talk about this in detail today, but we did find some literature supporting computer training programs as a way of protecting people's mental well-being. Social gatherings, sports activities, those kinds of things, a very important issue, particularly for men, and I'll come back to that point. And another area as well, specific actions and supports outside of the healthcare system that are targeted at helping older people who have caring responsibilities. So, for instance, there's a self-help program, and this probably is commercialised, but I don't have anything to do with it, called the Powerful Tools of Caregiving, which is there to try and help people. You know something I don't know about it, Christina, probably.
Yeah,
but,
no, I'm going to write it down.
Right, okay. But anyway, there are programs like that to try and give people the resilience and support to cope with the challenges of being a carer themselves. So lots and lots of different things going on. And self-management. I think somebody mentioned that earlier, but there's things like bibliotherapy programs and other self-management courses as well, and work in Holland has looked at the benefits of those in terms of protection of mental well-being and independence. What did we find? Overview. Most of the literature, and this was what Emily was saying earlier today, most of it doesn't come from the UK in terms of what we were looking at. We found 9 UK-based studies and 2 from the Republic of Ireland. But the rest of the literature really is from other parts of the world, not just the US, although the US does dominate. Quite a lot of literature, for instance, from Japan, particularly around this issue of intergenerational activities, older people coming into schools to work with children, or going into nursing homes, children going into nursing homes to interact with older people as well, for instance. But many different studies, many different countries around the world, including low-income countries or middle-income, Brazil, another example where intergenerational activities go on. Now, for those of you from an academic background, one of the challenges that we face in making a case in this area is that a lot of the studies are very small scale, and so they can be open to criticism because they're not considered by some people in the clinical world as being robust enough from an evidence-based perspective. So only 17 of the 80-odd papers that we found actually use something called the randomised control trial. It's kind of what some people would consider to be a very robust measure that really can determine effect and eliminate bias associated with the outcomes of a study. And the other thing to say as well is that many studies are relatively small in size. And again, this is statistical jargon, but when they were designed, they were never designed to be large enough to actually prove that they make a difference or not, okay? Which is a bit of a challenge. So we found 55 of the 80-odd have less than 100 participants, and a third have less than 50 participants. So very small-scale studies. But I think the danger is that if we dismiss all of this out of hand, then we're overlooking a wide range of potential supports and activities that can be invested in to help promote the health of older people. Another couple of quick comments to say around the literature as a whole. And maybe it's a bias on my part, but it seems to me that from the literature we found, most of it is reaching women rather than men. And the picture on the left indicates that, well, only in 2 of the studies was there approximately a 50-50 split between men and women participating in the study. And in many cases, the vast majority of participants in these programs, in these interventions, are women. So where are the men? And I know they may be dead, some, sadly, but generally speaking, what is it? Are these activities not actually attracting or engaging men, or do men prefer to do other things like interact with friends in the pub? Or what happens to men when they retire from work? Because a man's social status is very much linked to work, and they don't have the same social networks, some people argue, in retirement that women have. So all sorts of issues there. But there is a challenge about reaching men. And I'm not going to talk about men's sheds today, but you know, that's been sort of advocated as one solution, but the evidence base is actually quite weak at the moment. So what I want to do is, rather than going through all of this literature, which I can't do today, is just to give a snapshot of some things that are going on, to give a flavour of the kind of activities which I believe are things that could be delivered in every local area in the land. They're small scale, they're relatively low cost. There is a challenge, of course, how robust they are and how well they work, but here are some examples. Now, we found a number of programs around arts-based interventions. You don't need to read all of this. But for instance, there are programs about community singing, bringing groups together on a regular basis to sing, Silver Song Clubs, for instance. Several studies around singing, programs around dance and various musical activities, learning to play the piano, actually evaluating that from a well-being point of view, listening to music and reminiscing, all sorts of things. Bygone radio stations. There's one in Australia, but I've learnt since there's one in the UK as well, playing music from the 20s to the 50s. Yeah. But I wanted to highlight one particular study which would hopefully pass Christina's robustness test, which is coming out in the British Journal of Psychiatry on community group singing. And this is both an effectiveness study and a cost-effectiveness study on the benefits, mental health-related benefits of participating in singing. And the importance about this is that it's all well and good saying that, well, something makes a difference, but it's a reality of life that clinical commissioning groups and local authorities, health and wellbeing boards, all those kinds of groups, and their equivalents in Wales, etc., will want to know, is it value for money? Is it going to make a difference? Is it worth supporting and investing in some ways? And so this particular study, it looked at Silversong clubs in East Kent. So it's mainly white British people, it has to be said. Largely women, 84% of the participants were women. But they they participated in 14 weeks of professionally led choral singing, compared with people taking part in usual activities. And in terms of one outcome measure here called the SF12, which looks at positive aspects of mental and indeed physical health, there were benefits, significant benefits. This was deemed to make a difference in terms of people's mental well-being. And it was also shown in a cost-effectiveness analysis to it has a cost per QALY of £2,800, and that may mean nothing to many people, but essentially in England, if something costs less than between £20,000 and £30,000 per additional good year of quality life gained, it's generally considered to be something worth investing in. So from that point of view, singing as an intervention appears to be something worth considering. And it probably is a very modest cost to CCGs and local authorities because these groups are funded in other ways. But I'm not trying to advocate simply for singing. It's the group participation, the coming together of people on a regular basis, the building up and making of new friendships that can really make a difference. And singing is one way in which this has been done. But it does have the advantage of now being published in a relatively high-impact journal, very credible, and hopefully that makes a difference when it comes to trying to influence what goes on in local areas. And why is this important? It's not just the Silversong Club. Any of you from the southwest may have heard of something called the Golden Oldies, which is this large singing programme across the southwest of England, 100 local groups in existence. If you've got great eyesight, you will again see there are hardly any men in that photo, I have to say. But it's only been funded consistently, these groups, by one local authority. All of the others rely on charitable donations and self-funding and things like that to keep going. So I think it's Gloucestershire, but maybe another one that's been funding it on a regular basis. So this was the big sing anyway near Bath. So it's something that's happening at the moment. So it is something to think about. Is this type of activity worth investing in? Is it worth trying to get seed funding or support to run these kind of groups in local areas? Okay, so that's just one example of an arts-based activity, and I could have showed others. There's great work coming out of the University of Sheffield, actually, under the Dynamics of New Ageing programme by people like Susan Hallam, looking at the benefits, for instance, of people going to museums and what they get out of it and what they don't get out of it for some people as well. So lots of interesting work going on, but that's enough about arts for now. Friendships. There is an interesting literature on building friendships, and we can point to some of the Dutch studies that were mentioned earlier. But this literature is still fairly modest in size, but it is starting to grow. And I wanted to highlight again one recent study from the Republic of Ireland that was conducted by Brian Laurel and colleagues. And again, because hopefully it's considered to be more credible, whether we like it or not, because it's a randomised control trial. So it rings all the right bells in terms of being seen to be a relatively robust study. And this is called Only the Lonely. It's a relatively small study, and the idea here was to get 30 peer volunteers, so these are largely older people themselves, over the age of 50, visiting other older people for an hour or so a week to have a chat, have a conversation. Not do any shopping or anything like that for them, just to have a conversation, have a chat, in rural and urban areas of Ireland. And this was just for a 10-week period, and the de Jong scale was used to look at the outcomes. So Christine's pleased about that. Yeah. So there are differences there, so positive benefits in terms of both social loneliness and the emotional loneliness subscales. And I think an interesting thing about this, two other things, there are benefits to the volunteers. They looked at the benefits to the volunteers in the study. No control group for those, but there are benefits to volunteers. And the second thing is that after the end of the 10-week period, around about half of all the volunteers continue to go and have a chat with the people that they'd become friends with. So, because one of the challenges, actually, if Gail Mountain was here in the room, I know some of the work she's been doing largely in the north of England, where the challenge has been to get volunteers to participate. Getting people to give that time, is a challenge. But so if people have a good experience as a volunteer and continue to volunteer, that's a very positive thing as well. So this is a very recent study from Ireland, and it's an example of how a well-designed befriending programme with support for volunteers can make a difference. What about intergenerational activities? I mentioned those. Well, again, it's an amorphous area, lots and lots of different things, school-based things, things outside schools, other kinds of volunteering activities. I put down here 3 or 4 examples. Some you'll see from Japan, 2 from Japan about singing and dancing, older people and children in schools. But also there's a study from Cook, and I like the study from Cook. It's a very small-scale study. It's exploratory, uncontrolled before and after, so it's not quite as robust as some of the others. But it involves hens. And this is the Hen Power programme, and it's actually now been funded by the big lottery to expand it and to evaluate it further. This was 30 older volunteers over the age of 70, largely speaking, in the Gateshead area of England. And the idea was to train and support older people to rear hens, I guess is the word. So there's a video, I don't know if you've ever seen it, a video of people seeing the chickens hatch from the eggs, and then they literally do look after them, they nurture them, they feed them. I guess the chickens live with them to some extent. And the idea is then they go out, the volunteers who've learned to rear the chickens, go out and they go to schools and they have interactions with children, and they go and see older people in nursing homes as well and have interactions with them. And even though this is a small-scale study, it did measure outcomes in terms of the Warwick-Edinburgh wellbeing scale, so there's a measure of wellbeing. And there's also a measure of improvements in loneliness, although this was not significant, as the statisticians would say, but it's a very small-scale study, so that's not surprising. But nonetheless, it's about thinking creatively as well, about different ways of engaging people. And one of the things about Hen Power, one of the reasons it was set up, I think, it was really about trying to engage men, much more than perhaps some of the activities that were considered to be too feminine, perhaps. And they partially succeeded, although, if you can see on this slide, around more than half the participants were still women in this study. But nonetheless, it was about trying to do things in a different way, think outside the box. And these are not activities that are largely likely to cost a lot of money to actually support. Let's not worry about that. But just to say that intergenerational activities in schools, we should be interested in those. I'm not aware myself of much literature from a UK perspective on the benefits to older people of volunteering in schools to help children, but it is something that goes on. We know it works in other countries, and this is an example from the RSVP in Dorset, where they indicate on their website that more than 50 volunteers work with children on a regular basis whose first language is not English to help and support them. So it is an activity that is going on. So there's a challenge there about having more evaluation of these activities. Signposting. Can't spend much time in signposting because there isn't much time, but it's just to indicate again, there's 2 minutes of time, indicate again that there are schemes such as in Dorset or in Gloucestershire, I'm sure there are others around the country as well, but there has been some evaluation suggesting some positive impacts of investing in signposting programmes. And one particular example, because there's not so much time, is to look at the Dorset Wayfinders scheme. And actually that was evaluated as part of something called the linkage evaluation. And what they did there is they tried to build a business case to say what difference it makes from a business case point of view. And they basically estimated that for every 82 contacts between the wayfinders, these people who would help and provide information and support to older people, if that led to one reduction in a GP consultation and one fewer need for psychological therapies for depression, then the scheme itself will be cost-saving from a health system point of view. Now, you have to judge whether or not that is likely to be the case, but it seems actually a relatively modest goal that they were trying to achieve. And this is big news now. The Campaign for Loneliness last week, we're talking about these hotspot, heat-seeking map things. Loneliness maps, that's the word. And this is probably one of the original ones in the sense of Gloucestershire or part of Gloucestershire. And again, it's about intelligence, but then knowing what can you actually deliver locally. And if you had amazing eyesight, you will see that each of these areas have navigators, but they have time banks and befriending programs, all sorts of things going on. So it's about not only having this intelligence about the loneliness maps, but then trying to say, well, what can actually work at local level and within local resources. And that's why looking at some of these less smaller scale studies is important. I've got 1 minute left or less than that. Third age education. Very, very quickly, I was surprised. We could not, in our review, find very much from the UK on the benefits of lifelong learning. But there's a very strong literature from Spain by people like Fernández Ballesteros and colleagues that have looked at some of the benefits of older people participating in education programs, some of them specifically designed for people over the age of retirement. So there are benefits there, but I haven't got time to go into that. Other than to say, well, we have a lot of activities going on in terms of lifelong learning in this country, and there may be literature and evaluation I'm not aware of, but it seems to me that looking at the benefits of continued participation in education in terms of addressing things like loneliness and mental well-being is probably an area worth considering. And the University of the Third Age is one activity, that perhaps could be evaluated in that respect. Just to finish by saying, as part of this review, we've also looked in a number of different areas of the country as to what is actually going on. And this slide hasn't come out very well, but essentially what it is saying is the big column basically says that most of the things that are available in local authority areas tend to be what I would call traditional-based services and supports for older people. And to be honest, most of those are about lunch clubs and dance clubs and things like that. Very, very traditional. And the question I would raise for all of you is how appropriate that actually is now, or are the demands and the needs of different cohorts of older people changing? And is there a need to move away from this reliance on very traditional types of activity towards new types of activity around singing or around computers, or really trying to provide much more support for people to be volunteers? And we did hear from a volunteer in the audience earlier. And I know I have to finish. I know. I know. But I do want to make two really quick, important points. Lots of these activities, because by definition they're not provided by health services, they struggle for funding. They rely on short-term grants and lottery support and modest contributions from service users. And so this is why it's really important to try and build up some evidence on the value for money case and to demonstrate that they don't cost a lot and the potential returns merit some support from CCGs and health authorities. But the other thing to say, and it goes back to Christina's points on effectiveness literature and robustness, and it goes on to the next talk that my colleague Jose Luis Fernandez will mention, is really building up what we know about their effectiveness as well. Now, we can't have all singing, all dancing, randomised control trials, but we can do more than we're doing at the moment. And very few of the services we identified had ever been subject to any kind of evaluation, even monitoring of how many contacts they'd had and who was using the services. So, there are exceptions, but that's a real challenge, is to try and see what can be done within resources pragmatically to actually build up and strengthen the case for third sector and non-health sector delivered interventions. So there is some evidence out there, small scale, but I think it's positive. Volunteering is a key issue, intergenerational activities, arts and all sorts of group-based activities are things to think about. But again, just a couple of final caveats to end with. Do they reach everyone they need to reach, and how do we engage those groups that may well be lonely but don't feel that these activities appeal to them? So I hope that's of some help, and thanks very much.
Okay, so comments and questions. One here, and one down here, second.
Hi, my name's Rebecca. I'm from Care Messenger, which is a digital solution to help the elderly in reducing isolation in their homes. That's my professional bit, I've got that out there. But I actually wanted to say, as a Newcastle-based company, we have come across Hempower. And it's Professor Cook of the Northern University that has helped that Hempower be as successful as it was by helping people get funding. So I just wanted to say, if you want to find out more about Hempower, it is actually on Facebook, and we've got a great page, and also Professor Cook in Northern University will help. He looks at the ageing population and engaging people in more activities, including isolation. Okay, thank you.
Okay, great plug. Thank you. Questions?
Hi. It's just a comment really. How did they consider whether it's relevant the issue of social tourism, which in Europe is quite a known concept, and the Spanish government actually still invest quite heavily considering their economy in people, older people going away from home on breaks, which is partly what we do. That's my interest in it. So I just wanted to just reference it because it's just an issue that not many people know about.
Okay. It's not something we came across, but interesting.
Just one there, then one. Okay.
Hi, my name's Jude. I'm from Splice, which sets up time credit networks. We do a lot of work on loneliness and stuff. I suppose what I'm interested in is you're looking at academic studies and stuff that's going on in the anthropology sector. There's hundreds of thousands of projects going on, and some of them are doing evaluations. And I suppose whether or not you can engage with those through the sort of process, because actually there is some evidence now that we've done evaluations and whether or not they can feed into this sort of thing, or whether it has to be academic literature, and if it is, how does that reflect actually what's going on outside? Who decides who's going to do an academic review?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point. I mean, I think there's a danger that academics can be stuck in the ivory towers of academia and not understand the real world. But there's also the challenge of, like everyone else, we have to pay for our time to actually do things. And I think there has to be a halfway house in terms of maybe having some funding, let's say, for advice and information services so that local evaluators and local organisations can link up with academics, for want of a different term, to think about what can be done within the resources that you have to actually strengthen the arguments that you have to your local area. And that can be something as simple. I mean, it's incredibly simple, at least in theory, to actually identify who is actually using the service and how often they use it and what they were doing before they used the service, that kind of thing. Going all the way through to much more sophisticated analyses and thinking about things like have been mentioned today about the de Jong scale and the wellbeing scales, because the hen power study that used de Jong, but it's a very small scale study, but it did use that, and then they can point to some statistical outcome data that seems to be more credible than simply doing a more descriptive analysis, let's say. So I think there are ways in which people can work together. The other thing I would say, and I'm sure Martin would endorse this, academics, at least some academics, may be willing to give some of their time if it's going to lead to a decent publication. So if there's access to data sets and there's data to look at, whether it's longitudinal data or even other types of data, there may be academics who may be very interested in collaborating because in their own self-interest, they may think there's a publication to be got out of that, which is of interest, and that can be another incentive. So it's about collaboration, but being realistic about it as well.
Interesting Dave mentioned that as I'm a time manager. So
Yeah.
And then, yes, and then we'll have one there.
A couple of bits. Firstly, I'm not so sure that RCTs are so great for support. Just number one.
Yep.
Number two, you mentioned Finland at the beginning, and like I say, I want to do a little bit of a plug. Open dialogue, is that anything related? Because it's something that's been going on quite a lot at the moment.
What is open dialogue?
Open dialogue is a new way of dealing with mental health.
Okay.
From Finland, but not just mental health, it's going to be for a lot of different services. We've got great results, but it's little known, so I'm just doing a little plug there. Please, everyone look into the open dialogue. Thank you.
Well, I would say that Finland very much is at the forefront of research around trying to promote mental well-being as a concept and actually deliver that. So, but we didn't ourselves focus on people with illness in our review. It was about the prevention of illness. But I think looking to Finland is worth doing.
Okay, and then final question and comment here. So, yeah.
I'm Pat Gay, Associate Researcher at Institute for Volunteering Research. The traditional idea about befriending services is that a volunteer will visit somebody who is perceived to be in need of visit. And it seems to me that this is an unequal relationship. You're being visited by me, and that's a sort of an agenda that takes place. Now, it seemed to me that there would be a case for a more careful matching, a sort of community of interest. Do you know of any work that's been done on the subject of matching, rather like a dating agency rather than a befriending agency?
Anna may know.
Yeah, come up to the podium. Yeah,
Sorry, who asked the question? Oh, hello. The answer is yes, but it comes from a range of case studies, and I can send you this, or you can look on the Campaign to End Loneliness Learning Network website, because we have a number of examples there. But the one, I'm desperately trying to recall the name, that is maybe of most interest is something like We Are All Better Together. And they've created almost an algorithm to try and look at the different interests and characteristics and things like that and try and match people better. So there is work going on in that field.
You don't have a paper to refer to?
I don't have a paper, no, sorry, but I do have some practical case studies.
Just one quick thing to add to that. There was a wonderful GP and great researcher, the late Helen Lester, who did a lot of work in many areas, actually, including this one. And she looked at, for instance, at the relationships between befrienders and older people in various parts of the country. And one key thing she talked about was reciprocity, or also what the befrienders were actually learning and getting out of the relationships themselves as well. So I remember some anecdotes about learning how to put the curtains up better, or something that she had in one of her analyses. But the point is, if befrienders or volunteers generally feel that they're getting something out of it as well, new skills, new experiences, just having great conversations with people, that can also help. And maybe the digital technologies, the Facebooks of this world and things like that, maybe they can also be harnessed to try and do what you're suggesting, to try and match up people in the way that dating agencies have succeeded or not succeeded in the past.
In fact, just a serious point, I know there's a company that delivers online psychological therapy, and they have had basically donated time from somebody who has worked on dating agency websites, and they're using the dating agency algorithms, which are very successful, to match therapists and patients, to use that term at the moment, with great success. So yes, I mean, why not? I mean, there's a lot of money in dating agencies, so why not run on their platform of experience? So maybe the future is dating.
Well, and maybe that's something that for a long time has existed for those who have money, through the Saga type schemes and those kinds of things that try and encourage social tourism, perhaps, or whatever.
But there is literature on this that I can refer to.
I can certainly provide you with some literature around the work of Helen Lester, for instance, and things like that. So, yeah.
Okay. I think just one quick comment, and then we'll. So there's somebody there. Can you just stop there, and then we'll go to Louise.
Can I just add to that there's work going on in Bristol and Bath. So Aphrodite's study at Bath University, who piloted the ACE project last year, and that was matching people up, and that was done matching personalities and interests, and it was in order to improve physical activity by matching somebody with somebody who was isolated, and the two of them then identified something they were interested in going to do together, and they either walked or used public transport to get there. And of course, the volunteers and the person who was initially isolated both benefited from that. Less academic work is being done, or less academically reported work is being done in Bristol to develop something similar to support people with dementia.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really great sharing of information session. So thank you very much. Thank you, Dave.